My girlfriend said, "I'm going off birth control without telling you. If I get pregnant, it's meant to be." During an argument, I said, "That's reproductive coercion." Then I scheduled a vasectomy for the following week and moved out. When she announced her pregnancy 3 months later, and I sent her my medical records. Original post. I, 30 male, was with my girlfriend for about 3 years. We didn't live together for most of it. She had a place with a roommate, and I had a one-bedroom I'd been renting since before we met. About 8 months ago, she moved in with me when her roommate got engaged and moved out. That's when things started shifting. Some context on me. I work as an IT project manager for a mid-sized company. I make decent money, around $82,000, and I'm careful with it. I max out my 401k, keep a 6-month emergency fund, pay extra on my student loans. I grew up watching my parents fight about money every single week. My dad worked 2 jobs, and my mom still spent faster than he earned. They split when I was 14, and the fallout was ugly. Custody battles, child support disputes, my dad living in a studio apartment while paying for a house he didn't live in anymore. I watched financial chaos destroy my family in real time, and I swore I'd never repeat it. Because of that, I've always been transparent about one thing with every partner. I don't want kids right now. Maybe ever. It's not a hard no forever, but it's a hard no for now, and now has been the answer for my entire adult life. I told my girlfriend this on our 4th date. She said she was flexible on the timeline and that she wasn't in a rush. I took her at her word. For the first 2.5 years, the topic barely came up. She was on birth control, had been since before we met. We were careful beyond that. Everything was fine. Then she moved in, and within about 3 months, the baby conversation started appearing like pop-up ads I couldn't close. It started subtle. We'd be at a Target, and she'd wander into the baby section and hold up a tiny onesie and say, "Isn't this adorable?" We'd be at a restaurant, and a family with a toddler would walk in, and she'd stare at them with this soft expression and then look at me like I was supposed to feel the same thing. Her coworker had a baby, and suddenly every phone call was about how cute the baby was, how her coworker was so happy, how motherhood just changes you. I addressed it directly. I said, "Hey, I want to make sure we're still on the same page about kids. My position hasn't changed. I'm not ready, and I don't know if I'll ever be. I need you to tell me honestly if that's a deal breaker for you." She said, "I hear you. I'm not trying to pressure you. I just think it's natural to talk about the future." Fair enough. I let it go. But it didn't stop. The subtle became less subtle. She started leaving her phone open with articles about the best age to have kids and fertility windows. She showed me a TikTok of a dad doing a gender reveal and said, "You'd be such a good father." She mentioned, more than once, that her mom had her at 24 and didn't wait for perfect conditions. Then, about 2 months ago, we had the argument. It started over something stupid. I don't even remember what. Dishes, maybe, or who forgot to cancel a subscription we weren't using. One of those fights that's not really about the thing it's about. It escalated the way fights do when there's pressure underneath, and in the middle of it, she said something that stopped me cold. "You know what? I've been thinking about going off birth control anyway. My body, my choice. And honestly, if I get pregnant, it's meant to be. Maybe the universe is trying to tell us something, and you're just too scared to listen." I stood there in the kitchen holding a dish towel, and I felt something click off inside me. Not anger. Something colder. Clarity. I said, "What you just described is reproductive coercion." She rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, don't be dramatic. I'm talking about trusting the process. You're talking about making a unilateral decision about both our lives by secretly stopping contraception and framing a potential pregnancy as fate. That's not trusting the process. That's trapping someone." Trapping? Are you serious right now? I'm your girlfriend, not some random. Doesn't matter who you are. If you remove my ability to make informed decisions about reproduction, that's coercion. Full stop. She laughed. Actually laughed. "You sound like a Reddit post." I didn't laugh. I said, "I need you to tell me right now. Are you still on birth control?" She hesitated, just for a second, but I caught it. "Yes, I am. I was just talking." God, that hesitation lived in my head rent-free for the next 48 hours. Because here's the thing, I'd noticed something else. Her pill pack, which she kept in the bathroom cabinet, hadn't changed position in about 3 weeks. She used to rotate it daily. I'm observant about patterns. Occupational hazard of project management. The pattern had broken, and I hadn't registered it consciously until that argument. I didn't accuse her. I didn't check her pills. I didn't go through her phone. I did something else. The next Monday morning, I called a urologist. Made a consultation appointment for that Thursday. At the consultation, the doctor walked me through the procedure, 20 minutes, local anesthesia, minimal recovery. I asked how soon I could schedule it. He had an opening the following Tuesday. I took it. Tuesday afternoon, I went to the clinic alone. My buddy from work drove me, because you're not supposed to drive yourself home after. He sat in the waiting room playing Candy Crush and didn't ask questions because he's the kind of friend who knows when to just show up. The procedure took about 25 minutes. I went home with a bag of frozen peas and a follow-up appointment in 8 weeks for a sperm count confirmation. I didn't tell my girlfriend. Not because I was being secretive, because I'd already made a bigger decision that I hadn't told her about yet either. I was leaving. I spent the next week quietly organizing my exit. My name was the only one on the lease, but I've been wanting to move closer to my office anyway. I found a new one-bedroom, signed a lease, and gave my current landlord 30 days notice. I started moving things gradually, boxes to my car during lunch, dropping them at the new place on the way home. She didn't notice because she worked late most days, and I made sure the apartment still looked mostly normal. On a Saturday morning, 12 days after the vasectomy, I sat her down at the kitchen table. We need to talk. She immediately looked nervous. About what? About us. This isn't working anymore. What? Where is this coming from? It's been coming for a while. But the conversation 2 weeks ago about going off birth control sealed it for me. You told me, during a fight, but you still told me, that you were considering making a life-altering decision without my knowledge or consent. I can't be with someone who thinks that way. I told you I was just venting. I didn't actually do it. Maybe, maybe not. But the fact that it was even on the table, the fact that you said if I get pregnant, it's meant to be like my consent in the equation doesn't matter. That's enough. She started crying. You're overreacting. Couples talk about this stuff. It's normal. It's not normal to threaten to stop birth control without telling your partner. That's not a conversation. That's a warning. So what? You're just leaving? Over something I said? I'm leaving because of what that something revealed about how you see this relationship. You see a future where I get overruled on the most important decision a person can make. I don't want that future. She went from crying to furious in about 4 seconds. You're a coward. You're 30 years old, and you're running away from growing up. I'd rather be a coward than a father who didn't choose to be one. I told her she had until the end of the month to find a new place since my lease was ending. I'd already arranged the new apartment. I gave her the full 30 days, offered to help cover her deposit if she needed it, and said I hope we could do this without it getting ugly. She said, "It's already ugly. You made it ugly." I moved the rest of my stuff out that weekend. She stayed in the apartment for the remaining 3 weeks. We didn't speak. Reddit, I know some of you think the vasectomy was extreme. Maybe it was. But when someone tells you they might secretly stop preventing pregnancy and calls it fate, you either take them at their word or you gamble with an 18-year consequence. I chose not to gamble. And honestly, sitting in my new apartment with my frozen peas and my clear conscience, I'd make the same call every time. Now here's the part one haven't told you yet. She doesn't know about the vasectomy. And about 3 weeks ago, she came back into my life with a very specific announcement. That's for the update. Update 1, 4 days later. Thank you to everyone who responded. A lot of you had questions, and some of you had concerns, and I want to address a couple things before I get into what happened. First, yes, I've had my follow-up. 8 weeks post-procedure, sperm count came back at 0. The urologist confirmed I'm sterile. I have the lab results in my medical file and a copy in my email. This becomes relevant. Second, a bunch of you asked why I didn't just tell her about the vasectomy. Honestly, because it wasn't her business anymore. We broke up. My medical decisions after the breakup are mine. I don't owe her a disclosure on a procedure I got after I decided to leave. The vasectomy wasn't a weapon. It was a safeguard. There's a difference. Now, the announcement. 3 weeks after the breakup. So about 5 weeks ago from today, I got a text from her at 9 p.m. on a Sunday. I was on the couch watching football and eating leftover pizza. My phone buzzed, and I almost ignored it because I'd muted her contact. But I saw the preview. I need to talk to you. It's important. About us. I didn't respond. She sent a follow-up 20 minutes later. I'm pregnant. I stared at that text for approximately 1 second before a very specific calm settled over me. Not panic, not anger. The calm of someone who studied for the exam. I wrote back, "That's not possible." It is. I took 3 tests, all positive. It happened before you left. Quick math. I moved out roughly 7 weeks prior. My vasectomy was 12 days before the breakup conversation. But, and this is important, I hadn't slept with her in the final 3 weeks of the relationship. After the birth control argument, I'd been sleeping on the couch claiming back pain from a work injury. She hadn't questioned it because she was busy being angry at me. So either she was claiming a pregnancy from over 10 weeks ago that she was just now discovering, or the timeline didn't add up at all. I didn't say any of that. I just wrote, "We should talk in person." We met at a diner the next day. Neutral ground. She walked in looking different, not visibly pregnant. It would have been early if it were real, but she had this energy. Triumphant, like she was holding a winning card. She sat down across from me and put her hands flat on the table like she was about to make a business presentation. So, I'm pregnant, and before you say anything, I know this isn't what you wanted, but it's happening and we need to figure out how to handle it. Me, when's the due date? I haven't been to a doctor yet. I just found out. Me, you just found out. After 10 plus weeks. My cycle's been irregular. It happens. Me, okay. Who's the father? Her face changed. Excuse me? Me, it's a straightforward question. You're the father. Who else would it be? That's what I'm asking. How dare you? I have never cheated on you. Not once. I took a sip of my coffee. Set it down. Folded my hands. This was the moment I'd war-gamed in my head for weeks. Not because I'm some mastermind, but because when someone threatens to get pregnant to keep you, you think about contingencies. It's just self-preservation. Me, I need to show you something, and I need you to really absorb it before you respond. I pulled out my phone, opened my email, and showed her the document. It was the lab report from my urologist's office. Post-vasectomy semen analysis. Date of procedure clearly listed. Sperm count, 0. Confirmed sterile. I watched her read it. I watched her read it again. I watched the color leave her face like someone had pulled a plug. What is this? Me, I had a vasectomy. 2 weeks before I moved out. Confirmed sterile 8 weeks later. That document is dated, signed by my urologist, and part of my permanent medical record. You got a vasectomy and didn't tell me. Me, we were still together technically, but I'd already decided to leave. My body, my choice. Sound familiar? She didn't catch the call back. Or she did and chose to ignore it. This doesn't change anything. I'm still pregnant. Me, then the baby isn't mine. Because I'm physically incapable of fathering a child. So either those 3 tests are wrong, or you need to have a different conversation with a different person. She stared at the phone screen, then at me, then back at the screen. I could see the machinery working, the recalculation, the scrambling for a new angle. The vasectomy could have failed. That happens. I've read about it. Me, my sperm count is 0. Confirmed by a lab. That's not a failure. That's a result. Labs make mistakes. Me, I'll get retested if you want. But while we wait for those results, I'd like you to go to an actual OB/GYN and get a blood test confirming the pregnancy with a date estimate. If you're pregnant, and if by some miracle of failed medicine I'm responsible, a paternity test will prove it. I'll cooperate fully with a DNA test. But we're doing this the medical way, not the text message way. She picked up her purse and stood up. You're disgusting. You mutilated yourself just to avoid having a baby with me, and now you're calling me a liar. Me, I didn't call you anything. I showed you a medical document and asked for verification. That's not an accusation. It's due diligence. She left, didn't touch her coffee. I stayed, finished mine, and tipped the waitress because she definitely heard the whole thing and looked like she needed hazard pay. That evening, the text started. Not from my ex. From her mother. Her mom. I am appalled at how you're treating my daughter. She comes to you with life-changing news, and you show her vasectomy papers? What kind of man does that? Me. The kind who wants to verify the facts before accepting responsibility for a child that may not be his. Ma'am, the math doesn't work. If she's pregnant, I'm not the father. I have medical proof. Her mom. Medical proof can be wrong. Doctors make mistakes every day. Me. Then she should have no problem agreeing to a paternity test. Her mom. She shouldn't have to prove anything. A woman tells you she's carrying your child, and you believe her. Me. With all due respect, a woman told me she was considering going off birth control without my knowledge. I responded by making sure that couldn't happen. If the trust was there, we wouldn't be in this situation. She didn't respond for about an hour. Then, you're going to regret this. I saved that text. 2 days later, my ex's older sister got involved. She texted me a paragraph about how I was emotionally abusive and how refusing to accept a pregnancy was a form of reproductive control. The irony of that statement, given how this whole thing started, was so thick I could have spread it on toast. I didn't respond to the sister. I responded to my ex one final time. Me. I want to be completely clear. If you're pregnant, I will cooperate with a paternity test. If the test shows the child is mine despite my medical records, I will fulfill every legal and financial obligation. I'm not running for responsibility. I'm asking for proof. That's reasonable. If you refuse to provide proof, that tells me everything I need to know. She left me on read. Reddit. I know some of you are going to say I was cold. That showing someone medical records at a diner is harsh. And yeah, maybe the delivery wasn't perfect. But when someone weaponizes pregnancy, when someone uses the possibility of a child as leverage, you don't get to play nice. You get to play accurate. More coming. Because she didn't stop. And what happened next confirmed everything I suspected. Update 2, 9 days later. This is the last update. It's a long one, but I'm closing this chapter out, and I want to do it right. After my last text about the paternity test, I went 9 days without hearing from my ex 9 full days. No texts, no calls, no messages from family members. I figured either she was consulting a lawyer, going to an actual doctor, or regrouping for another angle. Turns out it was option 3. On day 10, I got a call from my buddy at work, the same one who drove me to the vasectomy. He sounded weird on the phone. Careful. My buddy, hey man, something happened, and I don't want you to hear it from someone else. Me what? My buddy. Your ex called the front desk at our office. She asked to be transferred to HR. She told them you'd gotten her pregnant and abandoned her, and that she was concerned about your mental state and erratic behavior. She said she wanted it on the record in case something happened. I went completely still. Me. She called my job. My buddy, yeah. The HR lady talked to her for about 5 minutes. Then she came to me because she knows we're close and asked if I knew what was going on. I told her you'd broken up and it was messy, but that you're fine. She didn't seem too concerned. Said she gets these calls more often than people think, and that without a specific threat or workplace incident, there's not much to act on. But she documented it. Me. So there's now a file somewhere in my company because my ex called and lied about me. My buddy. Basically, yeah. I'm sorry, man. I hung up and sat at my desk, vibrating with a kind of anger I hadn't felt yet in this whole process. Because up until this point, everything had been personal. Between me and her, contained to our lives. But calling my employer? Trying to plant seeds of erratic behavior and mental state concerns at my workplace? That's not a relationship grievance. That's an attempt to damage my livelihood. That's sabotage. I took 30 minutes, walked around the parking lot, breathed. Then I went back inside and sent an email to HR myself. I laid it all out, factual, no emotion bullet points. The breakup, her statement about going off birth control, my vasectomy with the date, her pregnancy claim, my request for a paternity test, her refusal, and her call to the office. I attached a copy of my vasectomy confirmation and the lab results. I said I wanted it on record that any claims she made to the company were disputed and that I had medical documentation to support my position. I CC my personal email. HR responded within 2 hours. Professional, neutral. They said they appreciated the context, that no action was being taken against me, and that they'd note my statement alongside the initial call. They also suggested I document any further contact in case it escalated to a pattern of harassment. I printed that email, added it to the folder. Because I'd started a folder, a physical manila folder. I know that sounds old school, but my dad taught me one useful thing. Paper doesn't crash and you can't accidentally delete a folder sitting in a drawer. I had the vasectomy records, the lab results, the HR emails, screenshots of the text messages from her mom, and her sister, and a timeline of events I typed up with dates. I wasn't building this to sue anyone. I was building it because when someone is escalating, you need to be ready for wherever they take it. And where she took it next proved me right. For days after the HR call, I got a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. It was a women's advocacy organization. A very polite woman said my ex had reached out to them, seeking support for a partner abandonment situation, and asked if I'd be willing to participate in a mediated conversation. I called back, explained the situation briefly, that I had a confirmed vasectomy, that she'd claimed a pregnancy that couldn't be mine, that I'd requested a paternity test she'd refused, and that she'd contacted my employer, making false statements. The woman on the phone went quiet for a moment and then said, very carefully, "Thank you for sharing that context. We'll follow up internally." I never heard from them again. I suspect that once they looked at the actual facts, the story she'd told them didn't hold up. Advocacy organizations deal with real victims every day. They can spot when someone's misusing the system. At least the good ones can. Now the part y'all have been waiting for. About 5 days after the advocacy call, I got one final text from my ex. It was long, middle of the night long, sent at 2:34 a.m. It started with, "I wasn't really pregnant. I'll give you a second to absorb that, because I needed a second too, even though I already knew." She said she'd faked the pregnancy tests. Apparently you can buy positive tests online for like $15, which is information I didn't need but now have. She said she did it because she panicked when I left and thought that if I believed there was a baby, I'd come back. She said she really believed we were meant to be together and that she just needed more time to convince me. She did not apologize. I want to be very clear about that. There was no "I'm sorry." The entire message was framed as an explanation, not an apology. I did this because of how much I love you. You pushed me to this by leaving. If you hadn't gotten the vasectomy behind my back, none of this would have happened. The vasectomy I got because she threatened to go off birth control. The one that was a direct response to her telling me she'd remove my reproductive choice. In her mind, my safeguard caused the problem. Not her threat, not her lies, not the fake pregnancy. My refusal to be vulnerable to her plan. I screenshot the entire text, added it to the folder, and then I did the thing I'd been holding in reserve. I'd already talked to a lawyer, not because I wanted to sue her, because after the HR call and the advocacy organization contact, my lawyer friend from college told me I had a legitimate case for harassment if I wanted to pursue it, and that at minimum I should send a cease and desist letter. I'd held off because I wasn't sure I wanted to escalate. But the 2 a.m. confession changed things. Because now I had, in her own words, an admission that she faked a pregnancy to manipulate me into returning to the relationship. That's not a gray area. That's documented manipulation with receipts. My lawyer drafted the cease and desist. It laid out everything. The fake pregnancy claim, the contact with my employer, the contact with the advocacy organization, and the messages from her family. It stated that any further contact with me, my employer, or any organization on my behalf will be considered harassment and will be pursued legally. It also noted that her admission to faking a pregnancy constituted fraud and that I reserved the right to share that admission with any entity she'd previously contacted with false claims. That last part was the key, because she hadn't just lied to me. She'd lied to my HR department. She'd lied to an advocacy organization that exists to help real victims. She tried to create a paper trail that painted me as an absent, unstable man who abandoned a pregnant woman. If I ever needed a security clearance, a custody arrangement in a future relationship, or even a clean employment record, her lies could have surfaced. The cease and desist made it clear that I would correct the record everywhere she'd contaminated it. The letter was sent certified mail on a Wednesday. She received it Thursday. Thursday night, her mom called me. For the last time. Her mom, a lawyer? You're sending my daughter legal threats. Me, I'm sending a cease and desist after she faked a pregnancy, called my workplace with false claims, and contacted an advocacy organization with a fabricated story. That's not a threat, ma'am. It's a boundary. Her mom, she made a mistake. She was heartbroken. Me, she bought fake pregnancy tests online, told me I was going to be a father, and when that didn't work, she called my HR department to suggest I was mentally unstable. That's not a mistake. That's a campaign. Her mom, you drove her to it by getting that procedure. Me, I got a vasectomy because your daughter told me she was going to stop birth control without my consent. Every action I took was in response to something she did first. I'm done being the villain in a story where I'm the one who got lied to. She hung up. I haven't heard from any of them since. The cease and desist, as it turns out, works pretty well on the whole family. Now here's the follow-up on the institutional side, and this matters because it's the part with real-world teeth. I contacted HR again and forwarded them the relevant portion of my ex's 2 a.m. confession, the part where she admitted the pregnancy was fake. I explained that the initial call she'd made to my company was based on fabricated information and asked that the record reflect this. HR thanked me and said they'd update the file. My boss, who apparently had been loosely informed about the situation, pulled me aside the next week and said, "Sounds like you handled a rough situation well." And that was that. No mark on my record. No lingering weirdness. Clean. I also called the advocacy organization back. Same woman. I told her the pregnancy had been fabricated and that my ex had admitted it in writing. The woman thanked me, said she was sorry I'd dealt with that, and assured me that the intake file would be updated. She also said, and this stuck with me, "We see this more than people think, and it makes it harder for the people who genuinely need our help." That sentence lives in my head. Where am I now? I'm in my new apartment. It's smaller than the old one, but it's mine and nobody else's. I've got the folder in my desk drawer. I hope I never need it. The vasectomy scar is barely visible, and I feel fine. I haven't dated anyone new, and I'm not in a rush. The thing people don't tell you about situations like this is that being right doesn't feel good. It feels necessary. I wish I'd been wrong. I wish she'd never said what she said about birth control. I wish the lunches with the pregnancy tests she ordered online had been something I dreamed up, but they weren't. And the moment someone tells you they're willing to override your consent to create a life, you have two choices: believe them and act, or hope they didn't mean it and gamble. I don't gamble. My dad called me last weekend. We don't talk often. Our relationship is complicated, a lot of baggage from the divorce. But somehow he'd heard through the family grapevine about the breakup. He said, "I heard your girl pulled some stunts." I said, "Yeah, she did." He was quiet for a minute. Then he said, "I wish I'd been as smart as you when I was 30. Would have saved me a lot of years." Coming from him, that's about as close to "I'm proud of you" as it gets. So that's the story, Reddit. I'm 30 years old, sterile by choice, single by necessity, and sitting in a quiet apartment where nobody's secretly planning my future without me. The frozen peas are long gone, the folder's in the drawer, and the ring I was starting to shop for before everything went sideways, still in the search history of my browser, which I cleared last night. Some things are meant to be, and some things are meant to be prevented. Take care of yourselves. And if someone tells you what they're willing to do to you, believe them the first time.